Welcome, everyone. We live in a time of tsunamis, right? So we hear every day, like, the new AI thing. Like, there's DeepSeek all of a sudden, and now there's, like, ChatGPT, and then, and all of a sudden there's tariffs, and there's, like, and things change every day, right? What I'm going to talk about today is not a tsunami. It's a slowly rising tide that is happening there in the background that we normally don't talk too much about, but that if you don't do anything about, it ends up covering you anyways. And that's demographic change, okay? Demographic change is this tide that is happening slowly and that we should talk more about. And of course, it impacts a lot what you're going to talk about after this conversation. So first of all, I'll start with a bit of the demographic situation of the world. It's going to be a bit of a global thing, and I'll be dipping into Spain here and there. And it all starts with fertility rates. So normally when we think about society aging, the word aging brings to mind older people, right? And that is part of the equation. But the main driver of demographic change and of aging societies is rising and falling fertility rates. Now, this is a picture of the world in 1965, okay? If a country's blue, it means that it's above 2.1 children per woman, which is the replacement rate, the rate at which society's population stays constant over the long run, right? And you can see that, as you know, like some regions had like 3, some regions 4, 5, 6. Fast forward to today, and most of the world, actually 2/3 of the world's population, lives in a country where the fertility rate is below the replacement rate of 2.1, okay? You can see that actually only in sub-Saharan Africa and some other small parts of the world here and there, the replacement rate is above, the fertility rate is above replacement. If we go to Spain in particular, the fertility rate today is 1.2 children per woman. And if you see the profile of Spain, it basically fell a lot in the 70s, 80s. Of course, that was in large part due to technology, due to the pill, due to women joining the labor force. Then there was a small increase, and now we're in a sort of second dip in fertility rates. Again, like in Spain and in the world. Just, by the way, as a data point, even India or the whole of Latin America is below fertility rates. So the very long-run consequence of this could be, if things stay the same, depopulation, right? And it's interesting because for many years, the world talked about to many people, right? There were, like, in the 70s, in the 80s, there were the Club of Rome, there were, like, the population bomb, etc. Actually, the world overall is going to peak more or less in between the 60s and the 80s, 2060s, 2080s in population, then population will start to decline. And here you can see some of the countries. These are, by the way, UN forecasts. This is what's called the middle scenario from the UN. So, for example, in the central scenario, Spain, by the end of the century, will have 30% less people than today. In some countries, it's going to be even less. So China would lose 55% of its population, Korea more than 60%. And for example, countries like the US are projected to have more population than today, partially because they have slightly higher fertility rates, partially because they have more migration. So migrations is a bit baked into these projections. One interesting thing, by the way, that you will notice is that the US is projected to have about 400 million people by the end of the century, China, 600 million people. So the US and China would not be too far apart in terms of overall population if those projections were true. Now, and one more point actually. As I said, this bakes in migration. So this is Spain alone. The medium scenario is this 30% decline that you've seen before. If we had zero migration, it would be 50%, right? So Spain would have about 25 million people by the end of the century, more or less. Now, more important than the overall global volume of population is how this population is distributed. What's the structure of this population, right? And one easy, simple way to do it is by looking at the share of population that is in working age. So the share of population that is between 15 and 64, which is normally how it's defined globally. And here, if we do that, we see 3 waves of change, right? So there's the first wave, which is the advanced economies and China. And in those countries, the working age population share already peaked in 2010. So we're in the declining phase of working age population. There's a second wave, which is all other emerging economies, but sub-Saharan Africa, which is interesting because people think of them as very young, but actually it's going to peak in the next decade. So this wave needs to get rich before it gets old. But it will get old, and it will get old sooner than you think. And the third wave is sub-Saharan Africa, which of course also needs to get rich before it gets old, but they still have significantly more time. Only towards the end of the century, working age population will peak. If we lay over Spain to this, it's similar to the first wave, just slightly more dramatic. So today we have about 66% of working age population. This will drop to 52%. In absolute numbers, what it means is that working age population will drop by 8 million people in the next 25 years. And population over 65 will increase by 6 million people. And again, this is 25 years, and demographics moves very, very, very slowly. So actually, this is quite certain. Like, the only way in which this changes is by with a big change in migration patterns. But demographics sort of react slowly, so this is not going to change much. It's quite certain that this is the way it is. So what are the economic consequences of that, which is the main thing I want to talk about? There's two broad consequences here. The first consequence is lower economic growth. And the second consequence is more pressure on public finance. And this is where everything that we're going to discuss today becomes very important, because healthy longevity will be very important, because innovation will be hugely important. We'll need to be more productive to solve this, okay? And this all comes from a pretty simple fact, which is well known, but I wanted to put the facts on the table, which is that people, as they age, they work less. That's well known, right? But actually what's interesting, and if you look at the different curves, what you have here is like ages so this is the lifetime curve, basically. So you have ages at the bottom, the x-axis, and the y-axis is the amount of hours per capita worked, okay? And what you see is that sometimes people assume, for some reason, that, like people work until 65, and then at 65, there's like a cliff, right? But the reality is not that. The reality is that around 50 in most countries, actually in all countries, participation in the labor market starts dropping. And again, that has a lot to do with health, with many things. So when we discuss, like when we say, should we delay retirement from 65 to 67? Sure, that can be part of the conversation. But there's a much, much bigger opportunity. That's just a 2-year window, right? There's a much bigger opportunity in like the 50 to 65 bucket. Like, what can we do there? How can we innovate there? What companies can do there? Et cetera, et cetera. Now let's talk about the impact on growth. So GDP per capita growth in Spain, I'm going to focus on Spain at the top, but you can see the rest of countries below. GDP per capita growth in Spain in the last 25 years was 1.1% per year. How was that achieved? The age mix, so the demographic effect, was neutral, okay? And then we added labor intensity. So by labor intensity, we mean more people in the labor market or more hours. In this case, it was largely because more women participated in the labor market, and that added 0.5% to GDP per capita. And productivity, so how much more productive each worker is, added about 0.6% per year. Fast forward 25 years into the future, and the demographic effect is minus 0.8, okay? So that means that basically a country like Spain, and you can see the rest of numbers, like Italy minus 0.7, Germany minus 0.4, so it's slightly different depending on the country, but you can see how many of those countries are starting from a more complicated point, given demographics and aging. So basically, the other two, labor intensity and productivity, have to make up for it if we want to keep growing at the same rate or faster. The second big consequence is impact on public finance. So here, it's a very simple chart. What you have is the evolution of the number of working age population per retiree, okay, per person over 65. So today, in Spain, we're at 3.2. Coming from 4.4 25 years ago. And this is going to drop in the next 25 years to 1.5 person in working age per retiree. And you can see that, again, like across countries, that's a similar pattern, right? So what can we do about it? And this is like, maybe so far this has been a bit like gloomy. So I wanna sort of move to what can we do about it. And basically, like, there's 3 levers that economies can pull here. One is labor intensity, i.e. work more, and I'm going to specify what work more means. Another one is be more productive. That is, make every hour of work more productive, and that's going to be the main lever, by the way. And finally, change the age mix. Now, changing the age mix is complicated because there's two levers within this. There's higher fertility rates and migration, but the truth is that higher fertility rates today will not do anything to the next 25 years, right? A baby born today, in 25 years, will be barely entering the labor market. So actually, like, fertility is out of the table for the next 25 years. It has to be migration there, and of course, it comes with its own challenges and, you know, like, especially political challenges to a certain extent. So let me discuss one of each, the three in turn, but you will see one thing, which is that across countries, the magnitude that each of them requires on its own is quite large. So really the only way is to do it all at once. Like, there's no way that, or it will be hard for a country to pull it with, like, just working more or just being more productive. Probably it's going to be a combination of the three. So what does working more mean? There's two ways to work more, right? One way is to increase labor force participation, so have more people in the labor market. Another way is just work more hours per week. Now, I'm going to forget about this second one a little bit, right? Because actually the discussion is the opposite, right? Like, the discussion we're having now is like, should we work less hours per week, right? So I'm going to assume that this is actually quite hard. Actually, the calculation we make is just to make up for the demographic drag, people would need to work 14 more hours per week, right? Which, you know, like, I'm going to assume that that's not going to be possible. So the other one has to be labor force participation. And here's where it gets very important that, for example, people that are in their 50s and their 55, 60s can work more if they want, of course, right? But, like, there are many opportunities there. Actually, like, if someone loses their job at 53, it's not very easy to get back into the labor market, right? So there's many opportunities there, I think. Now, the magnitude of the lever is 22 percentage points to do it on its own. So if we assume that productivity growth stays the same as in the past, you would need to get labor force participation from 61% to 83%, which would be the highest in the world ever, basically. So big opportunity, sure, but on its own will not do the job, right? So we need something else. And that something else is, of course, productivity. What we mean by productivity is how many goods and services and stuff we produce per hour worked, right? And that, of course, includes, like, health services, includes education services, includes everything, right? So GDP per hour worked. Now, to make up for the drag, for the demographic drag, Spain would need to grow productivity 4 times faster than in the past. And that would mean about 1.5% per year, which is not impossible at all. Actually, there's many countries that have grown at 1.5% per year. But that will require lots of innovation, it will require lots of investment, it will require lots of education, lots of training, et cetera, et cetera. This is the main lever. I have some, like, I think that the other one can be used for sure, but I think that it's, again, like, hard to believe the magnitude. I think this one is more believable. Still, like, 4 times faster is a challenge, right? Like, in the last 10 years, Spain grew at 0.3% per year productivity, which is very slowly. So we need more of that. We need more innovative industries, and health can do a lot there, of course. And the final one is migration, which, again, I'm not going to discuss too much because, again, it's more political, it's more complicated. But what we've done here is say, like, keep everything else constant and see how many more flow of migrants you would need per year to maintain the same growth rate as in the past, economic growth in the past. And what you see is that migration flow per year would have to increase by 4.5 times. So again, like, can we do migration better? For sure. Can we attract really productive migrants? For sure, and we should. Will we have 4.5 times the migration we have today in a productive way? Again, hard to believe. So message is you need all levers, and you need to pull all levers, and you need to act on them. I'm just going to touch upon the emerging economies briefly so that you have an idea of what's going on there. But I said before, like, the message is later wave countries, later wave meaning emerging economies, need to get rich before they get old. So how far are emerging economies from being old? And the way we measure it is by saying, okay, like, so advanced economies today have a support ratio, so a number of people, of working age people per retiree of X, actually of 3.9 on average. How long will emerging economies take to get to that number? And what we see is that across economies, and I've picked very different economies from very different continents, you can see that it's normally like 1 to 2 generations, right? So a country like Brazil in 16 years only, will be as old as advanced economies today. Mexico, 27, and even a country like India that you may think is very, very young, and it is much younger, in 33 years will be as old as we are. What's the catch? That if you take like the high income threshold from the World Bank, which is $14,000, it's not a lot, that's the GDP per capita of Bulgaria, India is below 20% of that. So that's what we mean when we say there's time, but you need to do a lot here. And India, for example, is progressing a lot in productivity, is progressing a lot on many fronts. But there's a challenge here as well. These are the two main opportunities, which are very similar to the ones that I've discussed before, but for emerging economies. So productivity is a big one. Why? Well, the productivity level of advanced economies is 60. That's dollars per hour worked. If you look at emerging economies, for example, let's go back to India, it's 9, right? And on average, it's 13. So these economies can do a lot of catch-up growth and improve their productivity. And the second one is labor force participation, and here many economies still have a huge opportunity in female labor force participation. So India, for example, to pick a very extreme example, only 29% of women between 15 and 49 work, are in the labor market, right? And Egypt is 16%, but even some other countries, like Mexico, for example, is 52. So big opportunity there as well. So let's move to businesses. What should businesses be thinking about? And they have to think about the two sides of the equation. They have to think about the labor market on the one side, so their supply, so to speak, from an economist's perspective, and they have to think about consumption. So they have to think about demand, right? On the supply side, the workforce is going to be older, basically, on average, right? So business needs to adapt to that. But it's not just going to be older. It's probably also going to come, at least partially, from different places. So this is just population. This is just the share of population over time in different continents, okay? So you have 1997 to 2100, okay? And what you can see here is that the share of population in the world in advanced economies will fall from, plus China, sorry, will fall from 35% to 26% to 18%, right? So there's going to be just less people here compared to the rest of the world. So a lot of the labor force probably will have to come in one form or another. It doesn't mean that there's going to be necessarily only migration. It could be like digital exports. It could be like service exports actually are quite common today, right? One shocking fact from this slide, by the way, is that sub-Saharan Africa in 2100 will be 1 out of every 3 humans. 1 out of every 3 humans will be in sub-Saharan Africa. So again, like something has to give here, something has to change, right? On the consumption side, of course, that's going to change quite significantly as well. So for example, if we look at Western Europe, 14% of consumption today in the world comes from Western Europe. That will fall to 9%. And that takes into account income effects. So here we're also projecting like how much richer each continent will get, not only how much bigger it will get, right? If you take North America and Europe together, they will go from 40% of global consumption to 30% of global consumption. If you take emerging Asia and India together, so India and the rest of emerging economies in Asia except for China, they will go from 20% to 30%, okay? So the global footprint of consumption will change significantly as well. But it's not only global, it's only within each country, right? So within each country, how will consumption change? What I'm showing here is out of every $10 consumed, okay, how many come from a person that is 65 or older? Today, it's $2.5 out of, so 25%, so $2.5 out of every $10 consumed come from someone that is 65 or older. In Spain, in 2050, just 25 years, it's going to be more than 4 out of every $10. So that will change market significantly as well, right? So how can businesses think about this, or what should businesses be thinking about, and how can they react to this? And I'll conclude with this. Basically, and I'm not going to discuss every word in this, like there's a lot of words here, but basically, the first very important thing is manage an older workforce with creativity, right? Again, there's going to be more older people that have to necessarily be in the labor force, and that is a good thing. That is a good thing in the sense that in many cases, older people want to work and cannot work because they have health problems, like they cannot get back into the labor market if they lose a job, et cetera, et cetera. So that can be a good thing, but that requires many things to be a good thing. One of them is health, for sure. Like, so working on health is very important. But also companies can do much more than that. They can think about the skills of the older people in the workforce, and, for example, to do with technology, so that they stay relevant. They can think about how they organize their labor force, like mixing older people and younger people in the same team so that the experience and the energy and capabilities, technological capabilities work together, et cetera, et cetera. So like I think that there's a lot of, like normally we think about what governments can do for some reason, like what do we do with pensions, and that's of course very important. But companies have a lot of creative, stuff to do there and can be a lot more creative than they are. Second one, I talked about consumption, so understand, reach, and serve older consumers. So think about your consumption markets. They will change, not just older, but also globally. So think about your global capabilities. A lot of the labor force may not come from where you think it will come from, and a lot of the consumption will not come from where you think it comes from. And that has to be rethought. And finally, and more important than all this, I would say innovate, innovate, and innovate, right? Like we need more productivity, we need healthier societies. And all this requires lots of innovation, lots of creativity, and that's why, well, these forums are very important. So going back to the beginning, I said that this is not a tsunami. This is a slowly rising tide, slowly but inexorably rising tide. And so what tides have is that they have a good thing. Tides have a good thing, which is that they're easy to predict, right? So I can make all these slides and say, this is what's going to happen. And actually, I'm going to be more right than in most other. If I had done a presentation on AI, I would have been probably 80% wrong. Here, I may be like 20% wrong, right? So there's a good thing about a slowly rising tide. The bad thing, or the risk, is that we ignore this, right? Because it's very important. And so now it's the time to act on this. Like, if we act on this, we can certainly have more productive, healthier, more innovative, and better societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much, Marc. Does anyone have any questions? Do we have a mic, please? Yeah.
Hello. Thank you very much for the very interesting talk. So you don't believe in robots? No Optimus?
Robots, yeah. So that is a question I get all the time. And yes, absolutely. So this is part of productivity, right? So like what we're trying to say here is, like the amount of productivity you need is this, and this can be achieved in many ways, right? So like my question, like I almost answer this back with a question, which is, okay, but how much more productive do you think robots can make us, right? Because if the answer is robots can make us like 0.2% more productive, that's okay, that's fine, that's great, but that's not enough. So I think that it's gonna be part of the solution for sure. Estimates of how much more productive can AI make us, for example, or robots, et cetera, normally on the tune of like 0.5% per year, something like this. It could be much more. So it's certainly part of the solution, yes, 100%. I think it's going to be a part of the solution. There's going to be a lot more. So there's going to be, like, productivity is going to come from this, it's going to come from AI, but it's also going to come from many industries, right? Like, healthcare is one of them for sure. We have like a lot of new like innovation in biotech as well. We have other things, modular construction, right? Like we tend to think about only AI and robots, but modular construction can make construction a lot more productive as well and better. So yes, but absolutely 100% that's going to be part of the solution.
Some more questions? Right there at the end.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for the talk. My question is, have you conducted the analysis of what domains would require the most enhancement?
What, sorry?
Domains.
Domains of what?
Of economy, like sectors, industries.
Yeah, so we've done some work on this, not as exhaustive, but I think that actually one of the obvious implications of that is that if you're in the health sector, you should partially celebrated in a way, in the sense that, for example, the health sector is going to grow significantly because of these trends. If you're in education, for example, probably not so much. Actually, one thing that we're seeing in South Korea, for example, is that you have empty schools that have to close, right? So some sectors will have massive big implications, like big growth, like healthcare, for example. Education will be the obvious one that probably will be smaller. I'm not saying worse in any way. It has also to be more productive. It can do a lot of innovation, but it will be smaller. And then everything in between. And I think that within the sectors, there's going to be significant changes as well in many ways, right? So, like, of course, the labor force will change, but that will be cross-sector. But from a consumption side of things, like, I could expect that, like, having older consumers will probably also change the composition of the sector itself. Sorry?
Their skill set also,
Absolutely.
what they should develop.
Absolutely.
Skills.
Actually, there's some work on that, like the skill set of the labor force, you mean, of the workers, right? So there's some work on this, and because people tend to assume, and that's a bad assumption. People tend to assume that older people, and again, like I say older all the time, but older I mean like over 50, which is not old at all, right? But older people are less productive in some ways or something like this, like the productivity declines at the end of their lives, and it's better to be out of the labor market. What the empirical research says is that people are not less productive when they're older, actually. They just have a different skill set. So when you're younger, you're probably more innovative, you're better at using technology, but when you're older, you, for example, have a lot more experience, you know much more about how the company works. There's many things that are positive there, and measuring it, you see that compensates, so productivity actually stays quite flat at the end of the life. And so that's why I'm saying that combining those groups of skill sets is very important and will be a massive force for the future.
Thank you.
I think there's one more there, but.
Hi, excellent talk, thank you. Perhaps naively, I was a bit surprised that the number of productive hours you showed in the graph across Europe was 25 hours per week. Is that because only a third of the potential productive workforce is there, or is it because people are paid for 40 hours but they only do 25 hours?
No, it's so that the hours were per capita, so not per worker. So that is because a lot of the people are not in the labor force. So that's accounting for everyone in the labor force. So it's accounting for like babies and older people, like everyone, and also people that are not in the labor force. So when you're in the working age, it's basically like everyone that, like, hours per everyone in that bucket, including people that are not working, that are unemployed, etc. And that's what lowers the average.
That was very slightly confusing because you had the 15 to 64 in the other graphs, right? Whereas you're telling me now this is the 0 to 80.
Sorry, what?
You're saying it includes the babies, et cetera, in that figure.
Well, it depends. So I don't know which one you're referring to. Are you referring to the curves?
So the one where you showed the lines of productivity per week. In all the European countries, it was about 25. In the US, it was about 30.
Oh, the one with the hours, like the hours worked in the bar chart. That was per worker, actually.
Okay.
So that was per worker. Yeah. That was per worker, and it's like many countries work about 30 hours per week effectively, because that includes part-time and includes many other things, right? So it's not just, but that was per worker, correct, sorry.
Well, thank you very much, Marc, for a random applause, please.
Thank you.